He is our friend Mike Florio. He's back with us now here on GCR. Mike, it's Glenn. It's been too long. Thank you for taking the time for me. Congratulations on the book, my friend.
Thank you, Glenn. It's been a crazy week. You know, we specifically picked the first week of free agency for the release of the book because it's our busiest time of the year, maximum audience to sell it to, et cetera. And then I realized, holy crap, we picked the busiest week of the year.
Right. Yeah, you got a lot of work to do.
We were trying to wedge more pizza, or what do they do? They try to put more cheese into the pizza. The pizza is overflowing with cheese.
All right, let's talk about the concept for the book, because I want to have you give away the Tom Brady could have been a Raven story, but I get you want people to buy the book to read about it, so maybe we'll just tease it. When you sat down and said, I'm going to write a book, this feels like a very broad way to go about doing it. What was the idea? What was the thought process behind what you were working on?
Well, and for years I had people telling me, you seem to know a lot about the NFL, you should write a book about it. And so I don't want to. I write about the NFL all day, every day. I already have the platform. I don't need to find a publisher. If I have anything to say about the NFL, I can say it at ProFootballTalk.com.
Right.
That's the thing that was built from scratch. It's been around for 20 years. I don't need to write a book. And eventually I just said, well, screw it. I'll explore the possibility to get people to leave me the hell alone. I don't, now I won't have people saying you should write a book, or if they do, I say I already did. Thanks for buying it.
Right.
But the process for nonfiction, you got to find an agent first, and then you got to come up with a concept that the agent then tries to sell to a publisher, and the publisher has to buy the concept, not the manuscript. Thank God you don't have to write it before you try to sell it. You sell the idea, craft the outline, and we went back and forth, and I feel like as much work was put into that phase of the process, figuring out what are we going to do, why are we going to do it, how are we going to do it, and we settled on this idea that we will look at the past 20 years in the NFL, broken down by 10 different categories, although the last one focuses on the future, and then within each of those categories, at least 10 essays that when you focus on the individual story, the anecdote, the controversy, the scandal, whatever it is that's the subject of the chapter, there's some truth about the way the NFL operates that comes through. So if you read the whole thing, and it's structured so you can just flip it open and, well, I want to read this, I want to read that. You don't have to read all of it. You can read some of it. You can read whenever you want. And it was structured a lot like Tim Green's book from 25, 30 years ago, The Dark Side of the Game, where he did a series of essays of similar length about what really goes on in the locker room, what really goes on the field, et cetera. And that ended up being the concept we agreed to. And once it was time to write it, it was just a matter of sitting down, and the thing wrote itself once we had it outlined to the point where we were comfortable with it. So I'm glad it's over, but it's also just beginning. That's the other thing I'm realizing. Release date is not the end.
Right.
It's just the beginning, even though you've already been going for 2 or 3 years.
Well, now they want you to go sell the book. Now they want you to come, do 1,000, as if you weren't already doing 1,000 radio appearances every week. Now they want you to
now it's like, hey, let's do another one. No.
Right. You're good for a little while.
Yeah.
You're good on that front. We've linked it up on our Twitter account, @GlennClarkRadio, so you can go check it out. Again, Playmakers, How the NFL Really Works from Mike Florio. Can you give us a tease on the Tom Brady Ravens story that won't give everything away and people can still read about it in the book?
Oh, no. I mean, look, there's plenty of nuggets in there of information that either wasn't previously reported or wasn't widely available. And, of course, when Tom Brady becomes the greatest player of all time in NFL history as the 199th pick, there are going to be plenty of people who claim that they saw it coming.
Right.
And Bill Polian has blustered in the past that they had a first-round grade on Tom Brady. Well, why the hell didn't you draft him then, Bill? Because
you had a few chances.
He's available.
Right.
He's available beyond round 1. If you have a round 1 grade on a guy who is still there at round 5, maybe you should think about drafting the guy before someone else does, and then you can develop him and trade him to someone else for more than what you drafted him for. I mean, these guys are interchangeable parts in a machine, and it dehumanizes the players, but that's how it is. If you wanted him, you go get him. You squat on him. But I heard years ago that Matt Cavanaugh was on the table for Tom Brady, and Brian Billick just had no interest. And I'm sure other teams, look, I mean, it's not like the guy was some vague prospect from Lithuania that, he was a quarterback of Michigan.
Yep.
He won the Orange Bowl. I think that his pre-draft work was so bad that that's what scared a lot of teams away. But there were teams out there that had him on the radar. And, even the Patriots, who took him in round 6, they took plenty of guys who never panned out before they took Tom Brady.
To your point, it's really easy to dunk on everybody related to Tom Brady, but even the Patriots didn't really want Tom Brady. He was an end of the draft pick. He was all
One
right.
of the reasons he became Tom Brady is because he was an end of the draft pick. That's
Right.
one of the ingredients. I say this all the time about receivers, that it's almost better to go in round 2 because, like Michael Thomas, even though he's fallen off due to injury the past couple of years, you get a chip on your shoulder that never goes away when you've suffered that indignity of
Yep.
putting yourself out there and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting, and the phone doesn't ring. When you clearly have a high degree of confidence in your abilities and no one sees it, you become more determined to put in the work if you feel like you've been slighted. And maybe Tom Brady never becomes Tom Brady if he doesn't get drafted 199.
That's a great point. It's a very, very good point. And look, the Ravens got their guy a couple years later in Kyle Bowler, so everything was fine. Brian
Yeah, that's right. It all worked out.
Found his quarterback. Playmakers available right now. Again, we've linked up on Amazon on our Twitter account, @GlennClarkRadio. Mike Florio is with us. Mike, I want to run this theory by you and get your thoughts about it because it's being sort of said quietly by a few people after the Ravens this week spent more money than we're used to the Ravens spending in free agency, right? There are people that say, look, boy, it really seems like they're kind of going all in this year. Are they aware that, like, Lamar Jackson's not going to be here long term? Are they maybe making plans that they need to try to win a Super Bowl right now because they're going to have to do something different? And as you know, it's been unlike when we were dealing with Joe Linta and Joe Flacco. It's been awfully tough to get really quality information related to exactly what's going on, and hypotheses are running wild when it comes to what's going on with Lamar Jackson. Where are you with that, and what do you make of the fact that the Ravens this week did something so very un-Ravens-like in the first week of free agency?
Well, one thing we have to take into account is the impact of the Rams' approach on other teams. And we're seeing other teams do things that maybe they wouldn't have done in past years. The Chargers, very aggressive. They're not just trying to stay competitive in their division. They're trying to stay competitive in the stadium they share with the Rams. And the NFL is a copycat league. Whatever works for one team, you have owners who show up at these meetings saying, why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we doing this? So you start doing it. So I think that's part of it. The Lamar Jackson thing is fascinating to me. This is either a deliberate strategic play or it's completely misguided. And I'm inclined to say it's misguided, and at a minimum, I think what he should do is set up meetings with 5 agents to screen them, to interview them, to maybe pick one, and along the way pick their brains about what they think of this approach of basically failure to engage, deliberate, if it is deliberate, failure to engage the Ravens, and you necessarily push yourself toward free agency. And I've said this for years. A first-round quarterback can, if he's willing to play 7 years with his current team, can force his way out because that third franchise tag, you do 4-year rookie contract,
Right.
5th-year option, 2 tags, and you walk away after that because the cap number ends up being astronomical because you get a 44% raise over your second franchise tag, which is a 20% raise over your first franchise tag. A third tag isn't going to happen. And if that's what Lamar Jackson's trying to do, I understand the theory. I just think he's the last quarterback who should be doing it because of the way he plays. Because he is going to get ground up, and we already are starting to see him get injured. He was indestructible the first couple years of his career. He got injured on a hit that really didn't look all that bad. That guy, the guy dove low at him when he was out of the pocket against the Browns. But between that and the periodic illnesses, and I think that he desperately needs an agent who can help him shape the right strategy and who then can go negotiate with the Ravens. And it's awkward for the Ravens too. I suspect that if the Ravens were being truthful about the situation, they would say, we wish this guy had an agent because we don't want to try to do a deal directly with a player.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you got to say things that aren't positive. You got to point out the weaknesses as you're working through a tough negotiation. I suspect that when they were dealing with Joe Linta on the Joe Flacco deal, they may have said that, he can't do this and he can't do that. It's hard to say that directly to the guy. So it would help everyone if he had an agent. And there's been this movement among some players, and fortunately it hasn't spread. It's one thing for one guy like a Richard Sherman or Russell Okung to decide it's right for me to not have an agent. It's another thing for them to try to spread that gospel and get other guys to do it too, just because they have a bias against the agents because they had a bad experience with an agent. I feel like that's the common thread. But the reality is, that 2 or 3% that you're going to give an agent, you're going to be left with more than if you get 100% through your own efforts. That's almost always the case. Richard Sherman, the first deal he signed with the 49ers was embarrassing. They had to get the NFLPA involved to try to get the 49ers to go back and tweak some of it to make it less slanted against Sherman. Okung's deal that he did on his own with the Broncos was beyond an embarrassment. He was completely taken advantage of by the Broncos. And these guys need good agents. Now, there's bad agents out there. You don't need a bad agent, but you need a good agent. And Lamar Jackson is good enough that he could get the best quarterback agents, and he could interview each of them, and he can pick whichever one he wants. And along the way, he can find out what they think of his apparent plan to go 1 year at a time, because I think it's a mistake. And if he was my son, my brother, my cousin, my friend, my client, I'd say you are doing the wrong thing for your career, your family, and your own financial interests.
Mike, if the theory is that he wants to do the 7-year thing and then go play elsewhere, or even that he's like turned off by what the Ravens offer was, and let's work with the idea. I don't know, but Lock and Forrest said it was a $35 million offer, which we all know that's a joke, right?
That's an opener. That's how you negotiate. You don't come to the table with your bottom line. If you come to the table with your bottom line, you're going to pay a hell of a lot more.
Well,
See,
sure,
that's the problem
sure.
with directly negotiating with the player. The player doesn't understand the way that the world works when it comes to negotiating.
So let me go back to that and say, let's just say for whatever reason, that's as far as the Ravens have decided that they don't think they want to pay Lamar Jackson $50 million a year. They don't want to pay that rate for whatever. If you're Lamar Jackson, why would trying to get out after 7 years be a better play than demanding a trade right now in a market that is utterly devoid of quarterbacks, where Kirk Cousins is getting Boku dollars, where there are, 7 teams in the NFL right now that don't have a legitimate NFL quarterback on their roster? Why wouldn't you try to force your way out to get that money now if that's what you're looking for?
Well, because if you don't have someone to do the work for you, to make the phone call to the Ravens, to make the request to the Ravens, how do you do it? How do you go about doing it? Who does Lamar Jackson call and have that difficult conversation with? That's the problem. And that's why players need good agents. It's very difficult to have these communications directly. And there's been no talk, there's been no rumor, there's no been anything suggesting he wants out of Baltimore now. Maybe he should. Maybe that's part of what an agent should be advising him to do. And, part of what an agent forces you to do is sit down and figure out what your objectives are. Has he ever sat down and thought long term about his football career? Or is he just kind of going one day at a time? I don't know. So that's the reality. When you don't have an agent, you have no one to force you to engage in the kind of long-term planning that results in the decisions. Do I go year to year and stay here 7 years and then move on? Do I try to get myself traded out of town? Do I do a long-term contract? Meanwhile, they got Tyler Huntley, and even though Huntley's not as good as Lamar Jackson, dollar for dollar, if they could, the thing I'm watching is, because he's an exclusive rights free agent, which means he's not a free agent at all, but if they would sign him to a multi-year deal, that would be an indication they're protecting themselves against the uncertainty that's going on with Lamar Jackson.
I hear you, man. We saw the Tyler Huntley thing. Like he's not an NFL quarterback either, Mike. Like he's a guy, and you can certainly have him around as a backup, but he can't throw the ball downfield. Like it's I've heard that a few times, and it's just I'm struggling with that. Like if they're making plans around Tyler Huntley, they got a bigger problem. Because,
well, and the other side of it too is they're getting closer to the draft, and
yeah, I mean, right.
You see what they do in the draft. Yeah.
Right.
Hey, and the other question is that they've built the offense around Lamar Jackson.
Yep.
Well, you either are going to have to change the offense, or you have to find another Lamar Jackson, and it'll be interesting to see how that goes as well.
I don't know that there is another Lamar Jackson, right? He's that unique.
It's unfortunate. Look, if this was happening within the confines of a guy who was represented by one of the top quarterback agents, I would say, well, this is a shrewd move, or there's a method to the madness. I don't know that there's a method to this. And that's what's unfortunate. If it's just kind of randomly happening and there isn't a plan, that's not the way that this should be going on, because Lamar Jackson is putting too much money at risk, especially in light of his playing style.
I hear. Again, with the idea that he has done a very good job of taking fewer hits, like he has done a very good job of eluding those big hits. But I understand what it is that you're saying, Mike, for sure. All right, I know you got about 1,000 more of these to do. Playmakers is available right now. Go check it out. Amazon. We'll link it up. We had a snafu. We tagged the wrong account, so we're fixing that, and we apologize, Mike. Anything else that we can plug for you? The show, the podcast, anything?
Well, that's all. That's the stuff. I'm used to plugging that stuff. 7
Yeah,
to
right.
9 a.m. Eastern, PFT live on Peacock and Sirius XM 85, PFT PM, Peacock and Sirius XM 85 at 5 p.m. Eastern. But go buy Playmakers. Don't get it in the library. People are saying it's showing up in the library. No.
Yeah, buy it.
Buy books.
Yeah.
Don't know. What's this whole swap meet used book? Bring it home. Somebody's had it in the bathroom or gotten nacho cheese Doritos all over it. Do you really want a book somebody else has had their hands on? Get your own copy of Playmakers. That's my sorry, librarians. That's my official position.
Mike Florio, appreciate you, my friend. Congratulations again on the book. It's an awesome accomplishment, man. Thank you for taking the time for us as
always.
All right,
thank you.